In the vast expanse of space, where 1,000 civilizations had risen and fallen like waves upon an endless shore, there existed a truth that would soon shake the very foundations of galactic society. The Confederation Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its curved walls rising toward a dome that displayed the swirling majesty of the Andromeda Galaxy. Here, in this cathedral of power, representatives from 47 species gathered beneath the eternal glow of artificial stars. The air hummed with the low vibration of translation matrices, each word spoken transformed into the native tongue of every listener present. At the center of it all, Supreme Chancellor Quathamarl stood motionless, a being whose crystalline exoskeleton caught and fractured light into prismatic cascades. 4 arms moved in practiced gestures as she addressed the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. "The matter before us today," she began, her words echoing through the chamber like distant thunder, "concerns the newest applicants to our sacred confederation." A collective rustle moved through the gathered delegates. The Veltori shifted their serpentine forms, while the gas-dwelling Nethkin pulsed with bioluminescent anticipation. In the elevated galleries, the warrior poet caste of the Kraldun leaned forward, their multiple eyes focusing with predatory interest. "Humans," Korth Marl continued, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a question mark. "From the 3rd planet of a yellow star they call Sol." Fleet Admiral Brix Anthor of the Hegemony rose from his seat, his massive frame casting shadows across nearby delegates. The Hegemony had ruled the Outer Rim for 3,000 years, their military might unquestioned, their honor absolute. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had never known defeat. "Supreme Chancellor, I must register my objection." His words came out in the low, guttural tones of his people. "These humans, they are soft creatures. Pink flesh, no natural armor, no claws, no poison sacs." He gestured dismissively with one of his 6 arms. "They die from their own star's radiation. They die from the cold. They die from heat. They even die from not breathing for mere minutes." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through certain sections of the assembly. The Zenthkari, those ancient beings of living metal, produced a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Furthermore," Rixanthor continued, warming to his theme, "their military capabilities are quaint. Projectile weapons that rely on chemical propulsion. Vehicles that move on primitive wheels. Their fastest ships barely achieve subluminal velocity." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "They are children playing with toys, requesting to sit at the table with gods." From the human delegation area, a small, almost pitiful section compared to the massive territories claimed by older civilizations, a single figure stood. Colonel David Cross bore the weathered features of a career soldier, his uniform simple and unadorned compared to the exotic finery surrounding him. The radiation burns on his left temple told their own story of battles fought in the void between stars. "Permission to respond, Supreme Chancellor?" The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the translation matrices seemed to pause. Korth Marl's crystalline features reflected light in patterns that conveyed surprise, perhaps even amusement. "Granted, Colonel Cross." David looked around the chamber slowly, his brown eyes taking in the assembled might of galactic civilization. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You're right, Admiral Brixanthor. We are soft. We do die easily. Our weapons are primitive. Our ships are slow, and by every measure you've mentioned, we don't belong here." He paused, letting that admission settle. "But we're here anyway." The silence stretched taut as a wire. "We're here because we crossed 100 light-years of empty space in ships that should have killed us just from the radiation exposure. We're here because we've been fighting wars for 6,000 years and somehow keep forgetting to quit. We're here because when our planet tried to kill us with ice ages and plagues and meteor impacts, we looked up at the sky and decided to leave." Ambassador Yethquen of the Ethereal Collective, beings of pure thought who had transcended physical form eons ago, manifested their presence as shifting patterns of light. Their voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like the whisper of cosmic background radiation made audible. "Your persistence is," noted Colonel Cross. "But persistence without capability is merely stubbornness. The galaxy is not impressed by stubborn children." Children. David's smile held no warmth. Ambassador, how many wars has the ethereal collective fought in the last 1,000 years? Wars are beneath us. We have evolved beyond such primitive. 3. David's interruption cut through the chamber like a blade. 3 wars in 1,000 years. The hegemony has fought 7. The Zenthakari, 11. His gaze swept across the assembly. In the last century alone, Earth has fought 43 major conflicts, some of them against ourselves, because apparently we're not satisfied with just one enemy at a time. Fleet Admiral Brixenthor's multiple eyes narrowed. You boast of your species' inability to achieve peace. I'm explaining our species' inability to stay down. David's voice grew harder. You want to know about human military doctrine? It's simple. When someone hits us, we hit back. When they hit back harder, we hit back harder than that. When they try to end us completely, he shrugged. Well, you'd be surprised how creative we get. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated voices, some arguing, some laughing, others demanding order. Through it all, Supreme Chancellor Quethmarl remained motionless, her crystalline form reflecting the chaos around her in fractured patterns. In the human delegation area, Captain Isabella Rodriguez leaned close to David's ear. Her scarred face bore testament to the siege of Europa Station, where she'd held a breach in the hull with her bare hands for 3 hours while repairs were made. You sure about this approach, Colonel? We're making enemies fast. David's smile was grim. Bella, they were already our enemies. They just didn't know it yet. The truth was, humanity had stumbled into the galactic community by accident. The deep space mining expedition to Proxima Centauri had discovered the beacon, a device older than written history, pulsing with mathematical sequences that had drawn them deeper into space. Following the beacon's signal, they'd found the network, the vast web of hyperspace corridors that connected every civilized world in the galaxy. And with that discovery, they'd found they were not alone. Not by a long shot. The Confederation had existed for 12,000 years. 12,000 years of careful, balanced diplomatic protocol and civilized warfare. Species rose and fell according to ancient rules, their conflicts managed and contained by treaties older than human civilization. It was a system that had brought peace to most of the galaxy. It was also a system that had no idea what to do with humanity. As the chaos in the chamber gradually subsided, Ambassador Nethvalar of the Symbiotic Unity floated forward. The Unity were perhaps the most alien species in the Confederation, beings of living liquid that existed in perfect harmony with their crystalline hosts. When they spoke, it was with the voice of absolute consensus. Colonel Cross, your species' history of violence is well documented in your cultural transmissions. But violence without discipline is merely destruction. The Confederation has survived by maintaining order, by following established protocols. The liquid being's form rippled with patterns of disapproval. You offer chaos. We offer victory. The words hung in the air like a challenge. In the silence that followed, even the translation matrices seemed to hold their breath. Supreme Chancellor Quethmarl finally moved, her forearms rising in a gesture that commanded absolute attention. The human petition for membership will be postponed, pending evaluation of their military capabilities. What kind of evaluation? David asked. The kind that has ended the aspirations of 12 other species in the past century. Quethmarl's prismatic features showed no emotion. You will face the hegemony's finest warriors in controlled combat. Should you prove worthy, membership discussions may continue. Fleet Admiral Brixenthor's expression could have been carved from stone. I volunteer my personal guard, Supreme Chancellor. The Crimson Spears have never known defeat. Accepted. Quethmarl turned back to David. Colonel Cross, you have 30 standard days to prepare your finest warriors. The combat trials will take place on Nexus Station. As the chamber began to empty, delegates filing out in their ancient order of precedence, David remained standing. Beside him, Captain Rodriguez shook her head. 30 days to prepare for a fight against the galaxy's best warriors. Using troops they'll dismiss as children playing with toys. She looked at him sideways. You have a plan, right? David's smile returned, and this time it held genuine warmth. Bella, remember what General Patton used to say. Which quote? The man had a lot of opinions. I don't want to get any messages saying that we are holding our position. We're not holding anything. Let the Hun do that. We are advancing constantly. Rodriguez frowned. David, that's not exactly a plan. Sure it is. David began walking toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. We're going to do what humans do best. Which is? Colonel David Cross paused at the threshold, looking back at the chamber where 47 civilizations had just dismissed humanity as a curiosity, where they'd laughed at Earth's warriors, where they'd signed the death warrant for their own understanding of warfare. We're going to show them what a Deathworld produces. The chamber doors sealed behind them with a sound like thunder, and in the depths of space, an ancient and terrible process began. Across the networks of hyperspace, messages flashed to distant worlds. The Confederation's finest warriors began to gather. The arena was prepared. The stage was set. And on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, another kind of message was being sent. A message that would bring humanity's true children home to play. The Marines were coming. 27 days after the Confederation's challenge was issued, Nexus Station hung in the void like a steel cathedral, built around the quantum anchor point of 7 different hyperspace routes. It served as neutral ground for the galaxy's most dangerous business, the kind that required absolute discretion and uncompromising results. The station's military district stretched for kilometers, its corridors wide enough to accommodate the largest species in the Confederation. Gravity generators hummed with the steady pulse of controlled power, maintaining the artificial environment that allowed dozens of species to coexist in the same space. In the observation deck, overlooking Arena 7, Supreme Chancellor Quthmarl stood beside Fleet Admiral Brixanthor, her crystalline form casting prismatic shadows across the reinforced transperisteel. Below them, the arena floor stretched across 2 square kilometers of adaptive terrain, a surface that could shift from jungle to desert to Arctic wasteland at the touch of a control. Your crimson spears are magnificent specimens, Quthmarl observed, watching the hegemony warriors complete their final preparations. Each spear stood 3 meters tall, their natural exoskeleton enhanced with power armor that had been blessed by the warrior priests of their homeworld. Ceremonial weapons gleamed alongside practical instruments of war. They are perfection made manifest, Brixanthor replied, pride evident in his voice. 30 champions, each with over a century of combat experience. They have fought in every major conflict of the last 200 years. Their honor is absolute, their skill unmatched. In the arena below, the Crimson Spears moved through their ritual preparations with fluid precision. Their leader, War Commander Grethnall, stood at the center of the formation. His scarred exoskeleton bore the marks of battles fought across a dozen worlds, and when he raised his ceremonial blade, the sound of his war cry echoed through the arena like breaking glass. The humans should feel honored, Brixanthor continued. To face such warriors is a privilege few species have been granted. As if summoned by his words, the arena's secondary entrance began to iris open. The gathered observers, representatives from every major power in the Confederation, leaned forward in anticipation. What emerged from the transport tunnel made them lean back. 30 figures in matte black armor moved with a silence that seemed to devour sound itself. Their faces were hidden behind tactical visors, their weapons held with the casual familiarity of tools rather than sacred objects. No ceremonial colors, no ritual preparations, no war cries or displays of honor. They simply spread out across their side of the arena and waited. This is their finest, Ambassador Yethequin's voice carried disbelief. They look like maintenance workers. In the human observation area, a small section that felt almost apologetic compared to the grand displays of other species, Colonel David Cross stood with Captain Rodriguez and a third figure who had arrived on the last transport from Earth. General Patricia Hayes bore the weathered features of someone who had seen more wars than most species fought in a millennium, and when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of absolute confidence. "They're not maintenance workers," she said, her words somehow carrying to the alien delegates despite the vast space between them. "They're Marines." War Commander Grethnall stepped forward in the arena below, his massive form gleaming in the artificial light. When he spoke, his words were amplified throughout the station. "Humans, I am War Commander Grethnall of the Crimson Spears. For 2 centuries I have brought honor to the hegemony through victory and battle. Today you face the finest warriors in the galaxy." He raised his blade in formal salute. "Die well and your names will be remembered." The human response came from their leader, a figure whose armor bore no rank insignia, no ceremonial markings. Only a small patch that read Murphy in simple letters. "Understood. You're the war commander. I'm Sergeant Murphy." The voice was conversational, almost friendly. "My Marines and I appreciate the opportunity to play with you. Play with them." The word choice sent ripples of offense through the alien observers. Ambassador Nethvalar's liquid form darkened with outrage. "The arrogance is astounding," they whispered. "They face certain death and speak of games." Supreme Chancellor Kodamaral raised one crystalline arm. Let the trial begin. Standard rules apply. Combat continues until one side yields or is eliminated. Arena terrain will shift every 10 minutes to test adaptability." The arena floor began to transform. Smooth metal gave way to dense jungle, complete with moisture and the sound of distant predators. Visibility dropped to mere meters as fog rolled across the battlefield. The Crimson Spears immediately formed their traditional battle formation, a complex geometric pattern designed to maximize their firepower while protecting their flanks. It was a formation that had served them well in 100 battles, proven effective against every enemy they had ever faced. The humans disappeared. Not retreated, not taken cover. Simply vanished into the jungle as if they had never existed. War Commander Grethanel's multiple eyes scanned the terrain, his enhanced sensors probing the fog. Typical cowardice. They hide like prey animals. He gestured to his warriors, standard sweep pattern. "Flush them out." The Crimson Spears began their advance, moving through the jungle with practiced efficiency. Their sensors swept constantly, searching for heat signatures, movement, anything that would reveal their enemy's position. They found nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The arena terrain shifted again, transforming from jungle to urban environment. A maze of damaged buildings and rubble-strewn streets that could have been lifted from any war-torn city in the galaxy. Still nothing. In the observation deck, nervous energy began to build among the alien delegates. The Veltifari coiled and uncoiled their serpentine bodies. The Nethquin pulsed with agitated bioluminescence. "Where are they?" Fleet Admiral Brix Inthor demanded. General Hayes smiled. It was not a comforting expression. Learning what? Your warriors." The first shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. War Commander Grethanel's left shoulder exploded in a shower of sparks as his power armor absorbed the impact of a projectile that had somehow bypassed his shields. He spun toward the source, but saw only empty ruins. The second shot took out Warrior Cathishill's primary weapon, severing the power conduit with surgical precision. The third shattered the ankle joint of Champion Vexmar, sending the massive warrior crashing to the ground, all in the space of 3 seconds. Contact. Multiple. War Commander Grethanel's report was cut short as something small and dark arced through the air toward his position. His enhanced reflexes should have allowed him to dodge easily. The grenade exploded behind him. Not at his feet where he'd expected, but behind him, precisely where his tactical doctrine would force him to move when avoiding the expected impact point. The shrapnel that should have been harmlessly absorbed by his rear armor instead found the weak points in his knee joints, dropping him to the ground with surprising efficiency. The Crimson Spears were the finest warriors in the galaxy. Their response was immediate and devastating. Energy weapons lit up the artificial night, turning rubble to plasma and filling the air with superheated death. If the humans had been where they were supposed to be, where any rational enemy would have taken cover, they would have been vaporized instantly. The humans weren't where they were supposed to be. They were in the buildings the spears were using for cover. Above them, below them, behind them. Inside their formation in places that should have been physically impossible to reach without detection. And they were teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Warrior after warrior fell, not to glorious combat, but to precise strikes that eliminated their ability to fight without killing them. Weapons destroyed, armor joints severed, communication systems disabled. It was surgical dismantlement performed at combat speed by enemies who seemed to exist in the spaces between heartbeats. Impossible, Fleet Admiral Brixenthor breathed. They're using primitive kinetic weapons. Our armor should be immune to such. His words were cut short as the tactical display showed another spear dropping. Then another. The Crimson Spear's warriors who had conquered worlds were being systematically taken apart by enemies they couldn't even see. In the arena, War Commander Grethnall managed to activate his emergency communicator. All units converge on my position. Pattern Delta formation. The surviving spears responded with desperate efficiency, falling back to a defensive circle around their commander. It was a textbook maneuver, one that had saved them in countless battles. It was also exactly what the humans had been waiting for. The attack came from every direction at once, not the wild assault of desperate enemies, but the calculated strike of predators who had been hunting as a pack from the beginning. Smoke grenades filled the air, turning the spear's advanced sensors into useless static. Flashbang charges overloaded their audio systems, and in the chaos that followed, 30 human figures materialized from nothing like ghosts made solid. The hand-to-hand combat that followed lasted exactly 43 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 30 Crimson Spears lay unconscious on the arena floor. Their weapons destroyed, their armor disabled, but their lives intact. In the center of the circle, Sergeant Murphy stood over the prone form of War Commander Grethnall, one boot planted firmly on the alien's chest armor. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. Supreme Chancellor Quathmarl's crystalline form had gone completely dark, a sign of shock so profound that several species had never witnessed it in their entire histories. This is not possible, Ambassador Yithquin whispered. They used primitive weapons, chemical propellants, kinetic force. The Crimson Spear's armor should have stopped bullets, General Hayes interrupted quietly. Just like our first combat suits should have stopped spears. Just like our plate armor should have stopped crossbow bolts. Just like our tanks should have stopped improvised explosives. She turned to face the assembled delegates, and her smile was sharp as a blade. You want to know the secret to human military doctrine? We don't design weapons to fight the enemy we expect. We design them to fight the enemy we're actually facing. In the arena below, Sergeant Murphy activated his external communicator. His voice carried clearly to every observer on the station. Control. This is Team Leader Murphy. Objective secured. No enemy casualties. Requesting medical teams for the wounded. Fleet Admiral Brixenthor found his voice. The wounded? My warriors are unconscious, not wounded. Sir, with respect, unconscious warriors tend to wake up angry. Wounded warriors tend to learn from the experience. Murphy's tone remained conversational. We figured you'd prefer the learning option. You showed mercy. War Commander Grethnall's voice was weak but audible as medical teams began entering the arena. Why? In honorable combat, the defeated should die with glory. Sergeant Murphy knelt beside the fallen warrior, and when he removed his tactical visor, the face revealed was younger than anyone had expected. Scarred, weathered, but unmistakably human, and alive with an intelligence that spoke of battles fought not for glory but for survival. Commander, where we come from. Dying with glory is easy. Living with victory is harder. He stood, offering a hand to help the massive alien to his feet. Besides, this wasn't combat. This was a job interview. The implications of those words hit the observation deck like a physical force. A job interview. The humans hadn't been fighting for their membership in the Confederation. They'd been demonstrating their qualification. Supreme Chancellor Quathmarl finally found her voice. Colonel Cross, I believe we need to reassess our evaluation process. David nodded. I think that would be wise, Supreme Chancellor. But first, you might want to know something about Earth. What about it? It's what we call a Deathworld. The chamber erupted. A Deathworld. A planet so hostile that life itself had to become a weapon just to survive. Planets where evolution didn't create creatures adapted to their environment, but creatures capable of adapting to any environment, where survival required not just strength or speed or intelligence, but the ability to use all three simultaneously while solving problems that would kill most beings before they could even understand them. There were perhaps a dozen known Deathworlds in the galaxy. None of them had ever produced sapient life. Until now, your gravity is twice what most species consider survivable, David continued calmly. Your atmosphere is 21% oxygen, a concentration that would be toxic to most beings. Your weather includes phenomena that would be classified as natural disasters on any civilized world. Your native life forms, he smiled. Well, you've met some of them. In the arena, the human Marines were helping the Crimson Spears to their feet, sharing water and field medical supplies with the same casual efficiency they'd shown in combat. Enemies one moment, allies the next. It was a transformation that spoke of a worldview the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The question isn't whether humanity is ready to join the Confederation, David said quietly. The question is whether the Confederation is ready for humanity. As if to underscore his point, alarms began sounding throughout Nexus Station. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in crimson warning, and the voice of Station Commander Rex Cole echoed through every speaker. All personnel to emergency stations. We have incoming vessels on attack trajectory. Configuration unknown. Intent hostile. Through the observation deck's main viewport, shapes began to emerge from hyperspace. Ships unlike anything in the Confederation databases, angular, predatory vessels that seemed to devour light itself, and behind them, more ships. Hundreds of them. The Devourers had found Nexus Station. And in the arena below, 30 human Marines looked up at the enemy fleet with expressions that could only be described as professional interest. Well, Sergeant Murphy said, his voice carrying clearly through the station's communication system, looks like the real job interview just started. In the chronicles of galactic warfare, there would be no adequate words to describe what happened next. Languages that had existed for millennia would prove inadequate to capture the scope of what humanity unleashed upon the void. But long after the battles ended, survivors would speak of it in whispers, of the day the galaxy learned what it meant to awaken a sleeping giant. The Devourer fleet descended upon Nexus Station like a plague of metal locusts. 237 vessels strong. Their formations had been honed through the destruction of 18 civilizations. Their tactics were brutally simple. Overwhelm, consume, move on. In 3,000 years of expansion, they had never encountered meaningful resistance. Station Commander Rex Cole's voice crackled through the emergency channels, carrying the weight of absolute desperation. All Confederation vessels. This is Nexus Command. We have enemy contact. Repeat, enemy contact. Fleet strength. Estimated at Emperor's blood, there are so many of them. Through the observation deck's transparasteel, the assembled delegates watched in horror as the first wave of Devourer fighters screamed toward the station. The creatures inside those ships weren't truly alive in any sense. The galaxy understood. They were bioengineered killing machines, bred for a single purpose: the complete annihilation of complex life. Supreme Chancellor Quathmarl's crystalline form had gone completely black, her forearms moving in patterns that spoke of calculations racing through her ancient mind. Commander Vexco, what's the status of our defense fleet? 12 vessels, Supreme Chancellor, 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 5 patrol ships. The station commander's voice held the hollowness of someone delivering his own death sentence. Against a force this size, the unspoken words hung in the air like a funeral shroud. 12 ships against 237. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and absolute. In the arena below, the human Marines had formed up in a perfect tactical square around their fallen opponents. Sergeant Murphy's voice carried through the internal communications with the same casual confidence he'd shown throughout the trial. Control, this is Murphy, requesting permission to return to our transport. Fleet Admiral Brix Enthor's multiple eyes focused on the human formation with something approaching confusion. You would flee? After such a display of capability? Murphy's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Admiral, with respect, we're not fleeing. We're getting our real equipment. Before anyone could ask what that meant, new contacts began appearing on the tactical displays. Ships emerging from hyperspace at coordinates that should have been empty. Large ships. Moving unknown vessels. This is Nexus Control, Commander Rexkill transmitted. Identify yourselves immediately or... Nexus Control, this is Admiral Catherine Hayes, commanding Task Force Manunur. The voice that cut through the channel carried the kind of authority that came from absolute confidence in one's own power. "We're here to pick up our Marines." Through the observation deck's viewport, they materialized like nightmares given form. Human vessels that looked nothing like the sleek, elegant ships favored by Confederation designers. These were weapons platforms, angular, brutal constructs that seemed to have been purpose-built for the sole task of applying overwhelming force to any problem that presented itself. The lead ship alone dwarfed any vessel in the Confederation defense fleet. When its weapon ports opened, they revealed an armament that defied understanding: railguns, the size of skyscrapers, missile pods that could have housed entire cities, energy weapons that drew their power from contained stellar reactions. Admiral Hayes, Supreme Chancellor Cathmarl's voice carried wonder and terror in equal measure. "How many ships do you have?" "Enough." It was an answer that said everything and nothing, delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that only came from species that had spent millennia learning how to kill anything that threatened them. The Devourer fleet reached optimal firing range and opened up with everything they had: energy beams that could crack planets swept across space, seeking the human vessels with the kind of firepower that had ended civilizations. The human ships didn't dodge. They didn't retreat. They didn't even bother with evasive maneuvers. They simply absorbed the incoming fire and returned it tenfold. The first, a Devourer ship, died in a ball of fusion fire that briefly outshone the local star. The second vanished in a cascade of secondary explosions as its ammunition stores cooked off. The third simply stopped existing, torn apart by weapons that operated on principles the galaxy was only beginning to understand. "Impossible," Ambassador Yethquin whispered. "The Devourer's weapons can sterilize planets. How are human ships surviving direct hits?" General Hayes had arrived in the observation deck during the confusion, her uniform bearing the insignia of someone who had commanded fleets in battles that lesser species couldn't even imagine. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute fact. "Because we built them to fight things worse than the Devourers." "Worse than the Devourers? What could possibly be worse?" The simple statement hit the gathered delegates like a physical blow. The implications were staggering. A species so militaristic that they designed their weapons to fight themselves. A people so inherently violent that their greatest enemy was their own reflection. In the void outside, the battle was reaching a crescendo that defied description. The Devourer fleet, an armada that had conquered a third of the galaxy, was being systematically dismantled by human ships that fought with the kind of efficiency that could only come from races bred in the crucible of endless warfare. But it was what happened next that would be remembered long after the battles ended. The human flagship, a kilometer-long construct that seemed to have been built from nightmares and applied physics, opened its primary weapon ports. What emerged wasn't energy or projectiles or any kind of weapon the galaxy recognized. It was Marines, assault pods by the thousand, launched directly at the remaining Devourer vessels, pods that contained not just soldiers, but representatives of a species that had learned to fight wars in every conceivable environment, including the hard vacuum of space itself. "They're boarding enemy ships," Fleet Admiral Brixenthar said, his voice carrying disbelief. "In the middle of a fleet engagement, while under fire from weapons that could annihilate entire systems." "Standard operating procedure," General Hayes replied calmly. "When you can't kill the enemy from range, you get close enough to kill them with your hands." The assault pods struck Devourer vessels like spears of divine wrath. What followed was ship-to-ship combat on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed. Human Marines fighting bioengineered killing machines in the corridors of vessels traveling at relativistic speeds, while their parent ships continued to exchange fire that could have sterilized worlds. And the humans were winning. Not just winning, dominating. Every boarded ship fell silent within minutes, its crew eliminated with the kind of ruthless efficiency that spoke of warriors who viewed death not as a possibility but as a tool to be applied with surgical precision. "How?" Supreme Chancellor Cathmarl's question was barely a whisper. "How is this possible?" "Because they're not fighting for glory." War Commander Grethnedel had managed to join them in the observation deck, his massive form supported by medical assistants. "They're fighting to win." The distinction was crucial. Glory could be achieved in defeat. A warrior could die well and be remembered with honor. But victory required something else entirely. Victory required the absolute determination to keep fighting regardless of cost, regardless of honor, regardless of anything except the simple imperative to ensure that when the battle ended, you were still alive and your enemies weren't. In the void, the last Devourer ship exploded in a cascade of fusion fire. The fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia was gone, reduced to expanding clouds of ionized gas and twisted metal. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Catherine Hayes' voice cut through the stunned quiet with businesslike efficiency. "Nexus Control, this is Hayes. Area secured. Requesting permission to recover our people." "Permission? Permission granted," Commander Briscoe managed. As the human assault pods began returning to their parent ships, Supreme Chancellor Kuthmarl turned to Colonel Cross. Her crystalline features had begun to show color again, patterns of light that conveyed emotions for which most languages had no words. "Colonel, I believe we need to discuss humanity's membership in the Confederation." David's smile was tired but genuine. "I think we'd like that, Supreme Chancellor. But first, there's something you should know." "What's that?" "This wasn't our main fleet." The observation deck fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. This demonstration of overwhelming force, the casual destruction of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy, represented not humanity's full military might, but merely the forces they'd had available for a rescue operation. "Then what?" Kuthmarl's voice trailed off. "The home fleet is still protecting Earth, just in case." David looked out at the human vessels, their weapon ports already closing as they prepared for the journey home. "See? We've learned something in 6,000 years of warfare. You never commit all your forces to a single battle, no matter how important it seems at the time." General Hayes stepped forward, her weathered features serious. "Supreme Chancellor, the Confederation has done well for 12,000 years. You've brought peace to most of the galaxy through careful diplomacy and measured force. That's an achievement any species should be proud of." "But?" Kuthmarl's patterns showed she sensed the unspoken word. "But peace isn't the natural state of the universe. Order requires constant vigilance, and vigilance requires warriors who understand that sometimes the only way to preserve what you care about is to be better at violence than anyone who wants to take it away." Through the viewport, they could see human Marines boarding their transports. Soldiers who had just fought the kind of battle that would be studied for generations, returning to their ships with the casual efficiency of people heading home from work. Ambassador Yethkun's patterns had shifted to colors that conveyed deep thoughtfulness. "You're offering us an alliance of equals." "We're offering you partnership," David replied. "We'll share our military technology, our strategic doctrine, our experience. In exchange, you share your knowledge, your wisdom, your perspective. And if we refuse?" The question hung in the air like a blade. It was Fleet Admiral Brixenther who answered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the future and understood its implications. "Then we face the next threat alone, and hope it's not worse than the Devourers." Supreme Chancellor Kuthmarl's crystalline form began to glow with patterns of light that conveyed decision, determination, and perhaps something that might have been hope. "Colonel Cross, on behalf of the Confederation Council, I formally invite humanity to join our alliance, with full membership rights and obligations." "And what obligations would those be?" "To help us defend what we've built, to teach us what we need to know, and to stand with us when the next enemy comes." Her patterns shifted to convey ancient wisdom. "Because there is always a next enemy." David extended his hand, a gesture that had sealed treaties and ended wars for millennia on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. When Kuthmarl extended one of her crystalline limbs to clasp it, the moment was recorded by sensors throughout the station. "Welcome to the Confederation, humanity. Thank you for having us." As the human fleet began its jump to hyperspace, carrying its Marines home to a Deathworld that had spent eons teaching its children how to survive anything the universe could throw at them, the galaxy began to process what had just occurred. In the depths of space, monitoring stations detected the first signals from beyond the galactic rim. New contacts, unknown signatures, moving toward Confederation space with intent that could only be described as hostile. The Devourers, it seemed, had been scouts for something larger. But this time, the galaxy would not face the threat alone. This time they had allies who understood that sometimes, The only way to preserve peace was to be so utterly, completely, and terrifyingly good at war that your enemies chose extinction over facing you in battle. The Marines were going home, but they would be back when needed. And in a universe where the only constant was conflict, they would always be needed. In the end, the galaxy learned a truth that would reshape the very foundations of interstellar civilization, that sometimes the greatest mercy is to be so powerful that no one dares test you. And sometimes the greatest warriors are those who fight not for glory or honor, but for the simple right to go home when the battle is over. The Marines had shown the galaxy what humanity could do. Now it remained to be seen what humanity and the galaxy could accomplish together. But that is another story.